Hi, my name is Kristen and this is Kristen Craves Books. So I think we all have quibbles or themes or tropes or even whole genres of books and fiction that we don't like, we aren't drawn to, we rarely pick up, and I definitely have those as well. But there are always books that are exceptions to the things I don't like, so that's what keeps me reading and trying different things, new genres, picking out books that are recommended to me, even if I know there's something in there that doesn't work for me. And I'm not talking about like content warning things, I definitely have triggers that I avoid, but these are like little themes within books, common tropes in romance, stuff like that, that even though in my mind I think I don't like them, and there are a lot of cases where I don't, I have books that are the exception to that, and I want to highlight those for you. And then maybe I'll do the opposite of this, where I talk about books that have tropes that I love, themes that I love, but the books don't work for me. I just think that's an interesting conversation to have. I would love to know if you have any recommendations for books that fall into these things that I am not particularly drawn to, but I'm open to trying if you think it's something that I like, because I've been proven wrong with the books I'm going to talk about today. So I hope that all makes sense. It's just something I've been thinking about. So I've been on a bit of a journey with sci-fi, trying to figure out what I like, what I don't like, and I realized there's a lot about sci-fi that I love. But something that doesn't quite work for me is time travel, and I wish that it did, because I like time travel in movies. I like that idea of traveling back in time or into the future, but I think that it can get tedious for me for some reason, and I think like the established rules of time travel, particularly that once you go back in time you can't make changes that affect the future, that's just like an unwritten rule. It's just a known fact in time travel, and I would love to know where that comes from. I should research that. I'm sure that started somewhere, but while that is interesting, it kind of makes the whole thing boring for me, because I often wonder, what is the point? And maybe time travel gets a little too philosophical for my taste when it comes to sci-fi. So a book that really addresses that question about what is the point is Before the Coffee Gets Cold, and that is why I love this book. It addresses the questions that I've had about sci-fi, and this is really about human relationships and love, and it's deeply emotional. It is a connected short stories that take place in this cafe, and if you sit in a specific chair you can go back in time or into the future, but the events that you are going back to have happened in real life in this cafe, and you can only stay there until your coffee gets cold, and you can't make any changes. So somebody comes in and says, okay, well, if I can't make changes, I'm not gonna go. But a lot of people do decide to go once they learn that information, because this is really about love. They just want to see the person that they loved again, or they just want to have one last conversation, or maybe hint at something. There's a moment in time that they want to relive with somebody that they loved, with somebody that was important to them. And it makes me cry, and I think that this is really about humanity. And I loved that aspect of this time travel story, and I think that this really addressed a lot of the questions that I had about time travel. And this is really simple. It's not a lot of action, and I think that is what it is for me too, because I would consider myself a character-driven reader. This is all about characters, character relationships, where a lot of time travel just is about action and adventure, which I know is really fun for a lot of people, but it just is not my thing typically, as you will see later on in this list. But yes, this is my favorite time travel story. So if you have any other time travel novels that ask and explore that question of what's the point, let me know. I'd love to read them. And this definitely relates to that. I don't like a lot of action and plot. I'm here for the characters, but quest stories for me are not my favorite, where characters are on a journey, they're walking, they're in a car. This is probably why I don't like road trip story, and I've yet to find my exception for road trips. I've never read a road trip story that I like. So if you have one you think I could love, please let me know, because I am on the hunt for that. I'm still open to that. Where characters are given this quest and they have to meet all these characters along their way to their destination. It's just kind of a boring setup for me. I just struggle with that concept for some reason. It's just too plot heavy, I think, for me. And again, you can hear my cat in the background. As always, we'll just let her go. But I always say that T. Kingfisher is my exception to this. T. Kingfisher writes a ton of these quest stories where we follow a character on a journey, and they always work for me. So I don't know what it is about T. Kingfisher. She can do no wrong for me, always works. And I have a couple examples for that. One that I read in January is The Raven and the Reindeer. This is a Snow Queen retelling, and we're following a main character who's on a quest to save her best friend who has been kidnapped by the Snow Queen, and she runs into different characters on her way. It's really just about the journey, and I loved it. And I think that comes down to the characters, because I feel that Kingfisher's quest stories are very character driven. You love the characters, even though I do think that her characters can come into, like, she's got like an archetype of the type of character she writes, but it always works for me. I love the characters in this one. There's also like a sapphic love story that I loved, and I don't know, I think this one really is about friendships and relationships in a way that I appreciated, and there's just so much that I love about Kingfisher. And another thing is she always includes animal companions, and they are always great. So there's just a lot about Kingfisher's books that I can hold on to, that the quest actually doesn't bother me. It's enjoyable for me. And another example of that from Kingfisher is Minor Mage. I loved Minor Mage, but it's again a main character on a journey. So I don't know, Kingfisher is my exception for everything. She does a lot of things I think I wouldn't like, but then I love them. So take with that what you will. This next thing is something I want to enjoy, and I love the idea of it, but I just have never really loved the execution, except for in this one case, and that is fiction that explores social media. I think the idea of talking about social media is interesting. As somebody who obviously has a YouTube channel, I have a blog, I have a Bookstagram, I'm on Twitter, all those things. Obviously, I'm well acquainted with social media. I know the toxic parts of it, the positive parts of it, all of that. So I think exploring that in fiction can be really interesting. Except it's hard to find. Sometimes I feel like it's overdone, or the person who's writing the book doesn't really have an understanding of social media, or there's not really a nuanced conversation. It's always more focused on the toxic part of it, but I appreciate having conversations about the positive side of it as well. And I haven't found many of those, and my example does talk about the toxic side of it, but I thought this book was so fantastic. So the book that I'm talking about is The Subtweet by Vivek Shraya, and obviously with the title you know that this is about the negative sides of Twitter, and we're following these two female musicians who enter this really strong friendship, but that is all torn apart through a like passive aggressive tweet. And then the hate that one of the characters gets from the online community, and how that affects her career and her mental health and everything. And I think it was so well done because it's on the shorter side, and because I already like books that follow musicians. I think that worked for me. I thought that this did a really good job of highlighting how the music industry, or just the world in general, pits women against other women, and how the online community can really feed into that. So I thought this explored some interesting things in few pages in such a short book, and I just thought this was brilliant, one I really need to reread, but the only social media book I have loved. So I'm slowly getting more and more into epic fantasy and trying to figure out what I like in epic fantasy, but epic sci-fi, like big space operas, I struggle with, and they're just so intimidating for me, and I just don't think that I love them. But one that I do love is actually a book that we read for the Book Checkout Book Club, and this is Unconquerable Sun by Kate Elliott. And this really surprised me because it does so much that I don't think that I love. And there's a lot of action in here, a lot of battle scenes, a lot of characters to keep track of, a lot of different motivations. I don't think you get all the answers that you want in here. So it's a lot of things that I don't think I like in epic sci-fi, but in Kate Elliott's hands, it worked for me. And again, a lot of that comes down to the relationships. The characters are all very unique, but even the fight scenes and the battle scenes I was invested in. So maybe I do like epic sci-fi more than I think, and it just scares me to death. So if you have any recommendations, let me know. But I know that the sequel to this comes out, I think it's out now or out in March sometime, and it's Fear's Heaven, but it's 800 pages, and that terrifies me. So this is more of a, the size of this scare is something that keeps me away from epic space operas. The amount of battle scenes and just having to set everybody up and knowing everybody's motivations and goals and just where everybody is in the world can be a lot for me, but I think that this one did it well and it worked. It is no secret that I love a good retelling. I love Greek myth retellings, Pride and Prejudice retellings, just adore them, but something I struggle with is Beauty and the Beast retellings. Beauty and the Beast, one of my favorite Disney movies. Love Belle, love the whole thing, but I struggle with the toxic parts of that story, especially the original tale. And so when it's retold, especially if it's a romance, I really have a hard time with it. I've tried many times. Uprooted by Naomi Novik, arguably a really well written book. I could not get into it. But this is where I bring up T. Kingfisher. She's written the only Beauty and the Beast retelling that I've ever loved, and that is Bryony and Roses. And I think the reason this works for me is A, the writing, the setting, the atmosphere, but the way that T. Kingfisher addresses some of the problematic parts of Beauty and the Beast make this more digestible for me, and it makes it work. And I like that she made the house more magical. So there's just the twists that she made to the story worked. I think she acknowledges in here the problematic elements of that love story, addresses it, kind of makes fun of it. So that is what I need in a Beauty and the Beast retelling. This is the one that has done it the best. So if you know any other Beauty and the Beast retellings that kind of are self-aware of the problems with it, please let me know, because that is something that I like. I love books that explore different relationships between brother and sister, siblings in general, twins, best friends. I love all that stuff, but there's something about motherhood that I just don't connect with, and that is probably because I am not a mother. I don't have any plans to become a mother, so it's just not like something I can relate to or I am drawn to. But I do think that I like reading books about the relationship between mother and daughter, but like a grown daughter, if you know what I mean. There's just something about the struggles of motherhood that I can appreciate in a novel. It's just not something that I am drawn to myself. But one that works for me is The Push by Ashley Audrain. This is about motherhood in that our main character is not feeling a connection to her daughter, and she's not sure if that's because there's something wrong with her daughter or it's just she doesn't have those instincts, but then she does have that connection when her son is born. So it's all about her trying to find this relationship with her daughter, struggling with motherhood in general, but this is also a thriller. So I think that as somebody who's not a mother, I enjoyed this and appreciate it, but I think if you are a mother, that this might be a difficult read, but you can relate to it. So if you have read this, let me know your thoughts on it. But I have tried a few books that explore motherhood, but this is the one that I always think about and the only one that I've really appreciated. So yeah, I know Ashley Audrain has another book coming out this year as well. I had a lot of realizations about my horror taste when I participated in the 72 Hours in the Haunted House readathon that happened in February, and one of them was that I like short horror. I love my horror to be under 300 pages, and I have many examples of that. But the one exception for me is Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth, and as you can see, this is a big book. It's about 600 pages, and I loved every single page. But this is a divisive book. I don't know, there's just something about this that worked for me, and I wonder if it is the blend of genres in here. It is definitely horror. It is haunted. It takes place at an all-girls boarding school where these deaths occurred in the past and are happening again now. You'll never look at wasps the same way again, and it's horrifying, but it definitely has that dark academia vibe to it as well. And I think that is something that made me sink my teeth into this, and I wanted all those extra pages, and I just ate this up. So I think maybe horror that is more of a genre blend can work for me if it is on the longer side. I just have to figure that out for myself. But right now, this is the only horror book that I've loved that is definitely over 500 pages. But yeah, it's such a good one. I'm open to reading from most settings, but for some reason, I'm just not drawn to stories told in a hospital, whether that's movies, books, television shows. I used to be a Grey's Anatomy fan, but not for many, many years. So it's just not a setting that really appeals to me. But I do have an exception, and I wonder if that is because this is historical fiction, and that is The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue, and this is set in a maternity ward in 1918 in Dublin, and I already love Emma Donoghue. But I think the historical element of this is what makes this appeal to me. It is set during the Spanish flu, so we are looking at this maternity ward and how they are dealing with that and protecting both the mothers and the babies. And there's also a relationship in here that I really loved, but the whole thing is set in a hospital. But I think the historical parts of that appeal to me, and you can just imagine yourself and the chaos that is happening in 1918 during the Spanish flu, and these women are trying to deliver their babies and what all the midwives go through at that time. So just something about this worked, and maybe part of that is it's Emma Donoghue and she's just a genius. But yeah, I really thought this was fantastic. And I know that Abby Jimenez has a romance coming out called Yours Truly that is set in a hospital, but that makes me nervous, but I adore Abby Jimenez and have faith I'm gonna love it and it's getting good reviews, so that might be an exception for me as well. I've said this time and time again, but I don't love fae stories. I want to be one of those people. I want to get on the bandwagon and love fae romances and all that. There's so many that sound good to me, but I just don't connect to fae for some reason, and I wonder if that's because I am more of a sunshine kind of person. I love like a sunshine hero, and often fae are a little bit more manipulative, and it doesn't work for me for some reason. But of course, here's my exception. Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. Read this in January, loved it, rereading it for the Femme Aficionados book club that we are discussing this in April, so please join us. I loved the fae in this, and I think that is because they are more of the fairy tale sort of fae. It's not like this brooding, really romantic story kind of fae, if you know what I'm saying. I don't want to say too much, but that is all I will say about this. The fae, the type of fae in here is different from what I have read from in the past, and I love that. So this is fantastic. And then love triangles. There have been love triangles I've appreciated in the past, but I don't love them. I don't seek them out in my romances. If I hear there's a love triangle, I tend to remove those books from my TBR. But I went to this book not knowing there was a love triangle in here, but I loved the way it was handled, and that is Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sue Lynn Tan. If you have read this, you understand what I mean about the love triangle. My problem with love triangles is that I often find that the author wants you to root for one character in particular, and you know right away who she's gonna end up with because he is a nice guy and the other one's a complete jerk, and I'd always just think, what is the point of this? But in this one, I could have seen her with both, and I haven't read this equal, so I don't know where it goes yet, but I kind of liked both love interests. I could have seen her with both love interests. I understood why she was attracted to both of them. They offered very different things and supported her in different ways, so I understood all that, and this book is just gorgeous. But yeah, this is the kind of love triangle I can get behind because I understood where the character is coming from. I don't feel like the author was manipulating us to pick one of them and which one we would be more into. So that is the kind of love triangle I like. If you know more books like that, please let me know. And then a couple of books I don't own. I don't like survival thrillers. I actually struggle with thrillers in general right now, but specifically survival ones, especially when you know who the killer or the bad guy is right from the beginning and we're just following a main character trying to live. It doesn't work for me. I find it boring. The stories drag. Again, I think that's a character thing where it's just about the plot. It's just about this one character trying to survive, and I find it boring. So I don't know why. Like, No Exit by Taylor Adams, people love that book. I struggled so hard with it. It's just not my thing. But the one exception to this is Don't Look for Me by Wendy Walker, and we were following a woman who has been kidnapped. But I think why this worked for me is because we also got flashbacks to her marriage and her family and the struggles she was having. So we get her in this kidnapping situation, which was very interesting and unique, and also her life before this. And then we get glimpses of her daughter trying to find her as well. So I think all the elements together made it more interesting. Again, it's more focused on character relationships, and she's really coming to terms with some things while she's in this horrible, horrible situation. I listened to this book in one day while going for a walk. I just kept walking because I couldn't stop listening to it. It is the one survival thriller that I've loved. And then speaking of thrillers, domestic thrillers are really not my thing. I've just had to come to terms with it. They always sound so good for me and I keep trying them, but I never love them. So I just have to stop, and 2023 I've decided I'm done with domestic thrillers. I just have to know myself. But the one exception to this is I Let You Go by Claire McIntosh. This is one of the greatest twists I've ever read, and I can't say anything more than that, but this is definitely a domestic thriller, but unlike anything I have ever read, that twist just really got me, and it's a book that I continue to think about even though I read it years ago. And then probably my least favorite trope is the Groundhog Day trope. I think, again, this is just the repetitive nature of that. It gets so boring for me. What is that one? Before I Fall? I struggled with that so much. I just don't like reading the same character go through the same day over and over again. It's boring for me. Even if things slightly change, I just cannot get into it. It's not a trope that I love, but my one exception is The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton, and the reason for this is the way that it is done. Every day this character is in a different body of somebody who was at this mansion when this murder occurred. So you get different perspectives every day. It doesn't feel the same. Stuart Turton is a genius writer. The way this all wrapped up, I was just in awe of his mind. So it never felt samey to me. It never felt like we were just reading the same story over and over again because everybody was in a different position doing something different that day. So it didn't feel tedious to me. I ate that book up. So those are all of my bookish exceptions. I'm sure I could come up with many, many more. And I would love to know yours. What is a trope that you really don't like, but a book that you loved that had that trope or theme or just a little quibble? I would love to talk about it. I will do a part 2 of this video, just the opposite, in the coming days because I just think this is fun to think about. And if you have any recommendations for books that fit into these things I don't like that you think I might actually like, please leave them down below. Thanks for your support. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye for now.